profound story for you, and it's going to be shared by two people who are going to be joining me here in a minute. And we're going to talk about something that some of our subscribers know a great deal about, which is MERS and the foreclosure fraud happening to over 400,000 people about a year. It depends on how you want to look at this. We don't know how many people's houses have been stolen from them by these fraudulent foreclosures. But today we're going to talk to one person who's had her house taken and another person who for 6 years has been fighting this. Now, let me put it in perspective. There's a company called MERS, and it is at the heart of this problem because this company is doing what the stock market does, what the credit default swap stock market does, what the commodities exchange does, and that's put everything into e-notes, into e-registries, into one single computer that is controlling the whole thing. And then it's owned by a corporation. And when that starts to happen, all kinds of fraud can slip in, amazing amounts of basically victimizing the people who are part of this system by those who are at the top of the system. And we have pointed out who owns MERS, the Mortgage Electronic Registration System. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to tell you that 80% of the homes, so we've told you before, MERS, the system that holds 80% of the mortgages of U.S. citizens, is owned by the same company that owns the New York Stock Exchange and the largest commodity exchange, the CME Incorporated, and the largest credit default swap clearinghouses. And this one particular company, Intercontinental Exchange Incorporated, has taken MERS to a new level because they absorbed all of the evil that was created by Enron and the derivative swaps that are done with futures, with energy, and many other things. And now they've absorbed this little teensy company called MERS for $8.2 billion. And now they've taken what is the huge problem of 2008, the crisis in the housing industry was all created by this very problem we're going to discuss today. And we're going to discuss it with two people who have experienced this firsthand. I myself have had numerous friends experience this, and we're going to give you some ways to get out of it also. We're going to give you some tips because in the description box, there's going to be not only articles that we've written about MERS, but also in those articles are places you can contact in case you are experiencing this fraudulent theft of your home through false foreclosures based upon using e-notes created by MERS. Because, folks, all you have to do is the following. Stand up to these people and attempt. The first stage is to say, show me the person who wants to charge you money for your house, because you've probably gone through a dozen different lenders who have handled your mortgage. You say to them, if you're, say, refinancing your house or you're selling your house, you say, please show me the deed. Please show me the title that you want me to pay on. And when they can't produce it because it doesn't exist, because MERS is only an electronic system and there's no more paperwork, $40.5 billion has been stolen from the counties throughout the United States of America that handles titles and deeds so that they could become e-titles and deeds or e-notes, and which is horrible. But the biggest fraud of all, folks, is the following. MERS, just like this little company inside of the New York Stock Exchange called Seed and Company, owns all of your stock. If you have a 401k, while it's being traded on the New York Stock Exchange, you don't own it. It's in an unbankruptable company called Seed and Company, C-E-D-E, and Company. Same thing for MERS. MERS now does that for probably your mortgage. If your mortgage came off of Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, or any federal system, then it has to be handled by MERS. And if that's the case, you have the chance to really say to them, this is a fraud. And if we can actually turn this around, and if enough people, and literally this is happening to millions of people whose homes have been fraudulently taken from them because the foreclosure procedure says the following. It says MERS is named as the nominee. MERS is named as the owner, as the representative in a trust of the owner. That's you, the lendee. And the lender is also MERS. So in your transaction, you're going to see in your paperwork that MERS not only owns your house, but they also are the representative of the bank, which is impossible. This has been contested in many states. Unfortunately, when it gets to the federal court usually stands behind MERS. But when it's handled on a local level, sometimes people win these cases, and I've seen them win these cases. And that isn't what happens normally. But if you have the money for the lawyer, if you have the money to go through this process, it is possible for you to turn this around and say, I'm sorry, MERS, you don't own my house. I own my house. And the lender that you say is handling my mortgage, they can't prove the chain of custody of the title and the deed or the mortgage deed. They can't prove any chain of custody. And therefore, I'm not paying you. Now, that works in some cases, but in other cases, what we're going to hear today is so horrible that we didn't even know this. The conclave did not know this, and it was a shock when our guest Ariel told us this, that as the mix is happening, the banks and the brokers and the title agencies and all the people who belong to MERS, which is simply an electronic system, they can move things around like you can't imagine. And what they actually do, and this is astounding, is they prey upon people, they victimize them, they prey upon weak people, they victimize them, they take their mortgages, they sell their houses over and over again while they're messing with the owner of the house. Literally, sell the house over and over and over again, folks, because there's no proof in this e-system who's buying it, who's selling it, how many times, who's the mortgage lender, who's handling the loan. It's such a massive confusion that predatory bankers come in and they prey upon people. And they basically become real estate, economic terrorists. And we're going to tell you about one of the worst ones that we have come across through the direct experience of two people who are, one of them has had her life ruined and she's having to live in a travel trailer because her house was stolen by this person, a banker, who basically is a real estate predator, as many other things. And another person who's been fighting it for 6 years. Everything that they have put on the line to try to keep their house and their property from these predators. And we did not know that it literally goes down into these predators attack these people physically. They go into their house. They steal documents. You can't imagine the suffering that has been withstood by the people undergoing this real estate calamity. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Tried to put it in perspective. And I'm going to open the floor now to our two guests. Our first guest, her name is Ariel, and we have another guest named Denise. So Ariel, welcome to the show, and thank you for being so brave to step out and speak about this problem.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Douglas.
And Denise, thank you for being here today. You've suffered a lot, and we appreciate you coming forward.
Thank you, Douglas. I really appreciate being able to come and tell my story.
You know, Ariel, when I had a chat with you some weeks ago, it truly upset me.
I really will never understand why I was called to this battle because I had so many other important things to do in my life. But it definitely began with paying my payments for a year, having them put in escrow, and then having a foreclosure begin on my life against 5 different companies, which was very confusing in the beginning. I had to defend myself in many courts and began to realize that they never had the title or the note in order to foreclose on me. It was like unraveling a huge tapestry, thread by thread, and beginning to comprehend or fathom the complexity, and I have to honestly say the evil genius that this banker and many banks have been doing in order to thieve America or harvest our homes and harvest a great deal of money from the working class people in a very hidden way. It isn't like a bandit runs up with a gun and robs you. It's done very secretly.
Wow. Well, you have told me you're fighting on so many levels. You've spent so much money, 6 years. What I call it fake justice. How have the courts treated you?
Absolutely terribly. We have not had any of our civil rights. We have not had our constitutional rights. We have not had our due jury by trial. We have realized that all these judges have retirement funds in banks. So I'm aware that there are a few judges that stood up in this country and said, wow, the judges are throwing the homeowners under the bus. They're not listening. They're doing summary judgment, which is dismissing us without listening or looking at our evidence. And our evidence is very clear. We can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that these companies did not exist, that they created these fraudulent and forged documents, that they cannot provide the original note or deed, and that we are being ignored and we are not going to be heard.
That is sad. I understand that both you, Ariel, and you, Denise, are known pretty well in this community of people who've had to suffer this, literally millions of people who are suffering this similar fate. And so I understand that you have been in contact with people across the country, and that in a way you've kind of got your ear to the ground and you understand the current situation as it is, and many people do support you and they're watching your case. I mean, your case somehow ended up in what was it, the Southern District of New York?
I have been through so many courts you wouldn't believe it. And to be honest, Douglas, this should have ended in the state court when it began. But they filed in the state court just so I would pay the $500 fee, and then they immediately moved it to the federal court, which there are the strategy books that the judges and the banks are using right now to make sure that we are in the courts where they can dismiss us and ignore us. I've been through the state, the federal. I've written a motion, 60 motion to review it. I've done the appeals court. I've done suing the judges, suing the lawyers. I've done suing the sheriffs. I'm in the Oregon Supreme Court on appeal, and I'm in the 49th District Bankruptcy Court. And I really want to say something about that. Back in 2008, when this whole crisis began, the 49 attorney generals had been investigating almost every bank in this country. The list goes on for page after page. And there was a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit that was settled against almost every bank you can dream of for fraudulent real estate, forgery, improper foreclosure, and all the documents were considered bad paper and were not to be used any further. Then Perkins Coie was the insurance representative for them and helped one of these banks, Residential Funding, to minimize the amount of penalty or debt that they had. Well, it turns out that Residential Funding is in this long chain of cases, assignments that my documents prove are false. And it was those bad papers that were used in order to come and foreclose on me in later years. The same lawyer company, Perkins and Coie, that were involved with the multi-billion-dollar 49 attorney generals, you're all guilty, banks. All you banks are guilty. You're going to pay all of the attorney generals a huge amount of money for all the fraud that you've done, and we're not going to give any of it to the people who had the fraud perpetuated upon them. But those same lawyers then came after me, and in conflict of interest did not reveal that they knew my documents were forged from the beginning. And instead, they launched a long fight, we're almost 6 years now, fight or battle against me with unlimited millions and millions and millions of dollars. I think they have, 850 lawyers just in a few cities around me right now that fight me, who started out with one lawyer and realized lawyers were intimidated to fight against these lawyers and these judges, then went pro se litigant for a while, then hired another attorney, then hired another attorney, and right now I have 4 attorneys. And it's just amazing that no matter how much I have justice and truth and law on my side and can prove that they have never had a note or a deed ever from the beginning and that they knew this, I continue to be bounced and to continue to fight and continue to be ignored. And I'm hoping that at this point I have them backed in a corner, and I can't wait to see their final brief from the 49th Court, where the Attorney General brought the final lawsuit down and convicted the banks. And the banks were convicted. And the millions and millions of dollars were dispersed. And the 49 Attorney Generals kept it all.
Well, you know, that's very interesting, because the people that I saw go through this they had that one step that you also had when they told you to put your money into an escrow account. Well, generally, when these homeowners saw during the Obama era the advertisements that they could reduce their mortgages through a federal program, they did that. And so if you would do that, you would often find these carpetbaggers, these scallywags who would come along, and they would advise homeowners on what to do. And almost 100% of the time, they told them to take their payments and to put them in escrow and not to pay them, because that was part of the program. And so that's what caused them to get their houses taken away from them, because they did what these people told them. They did what the federal program seemed to insinuate. The federal program was linked to the banks. The banks told all those people, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. You just hold on that, and then we'll square up with you when the federal government determines what your real rate should have been. And then what happens? Then you get a note that not only have you been foreclosed on, but your house has gone to the sheriff and they've sold it. And you say, but wait, I have this counselor who's working with this Obama program. And then they sell your house. They kick you out. As long as you don't, for 1 minute, if you're not in that house, they will kick you out. Oftentimes they can't if you're in the house. But 1 minute you leave the house, they kick you out, they put locks on it, they take your house, and the sheriff puts all your stuff out on the sidewalk, and that's the last you know of it, until many of these people, years later, get a check. And that check apologizes to them because they've been included in a class action fraudulent lawsuit that they knew nothing about, and here's your $1,400, $1,400. That was usually about the payment that they made on their mortgage per month. That was what they got for having their house stolen from them through this fraudulent, Obama-supported, bank-supported, sheriff-supported ripoff. And you, I believe, as you said, had to put your money in escrow, and then they used that against you. And then I believe that while your money was in escrow, they bought and sold your house many times. And then eventually the sheriff just said, no, we're selling it. Sorry, tough luck. I mean, it's astounding. How much money did you spend, by the way, on lawyers? Have you spent so far?
I put $60,000 down on my property and paid $350,000 down on my property before this began. I've spent another $250,000 or $260,000 on attorneys, and I'm not done. And they knew that my house had equity, and I didn't put my money in escrow. They took my on-time payments for a year and put them into escrow, and were collecting money behind my back, watch The Big Short. They collected insurance, probably 3 times the value of my property, saying that I didn't make my payments. And then when the foreclosure started, I sued them, because I then realized you've not only put my payments into escrow, you've even charged me late payments. You've charged for people to come out here and look at my house so you can sell it $500 a shot. You've made up so many fees that I can't even comprehend it now that I've obtained a lawyer and decided to sue you. And I can't even begin to fathom, again, how many times they sold it. It's called a black acre, which means they can digitally sell your property for its full value. So I bought a property for $350,000. They sold it for the 30-year mortgage plus, which makes it $1 million sale. They've sold it over and over and over, and they've transferred these assignments between company upon company upon company upon company that are all sham companies and owned by Andy Beal. And he's even made or bought, I don't even think he paid for it. He actually used residential funding after the 2008 crash, which showed multiple banks funneling all their bad paper through what's called residential funding. And this banker, Andy Beal, came in and bought every bank's bad paper and then hesitated for a little while. And mine was in a bankruptcy. Residential Funding went bankrupt. So they weren't even able to assign that asset to anyone. And Andy Beal came along and bought all the bad paper. He then began to make forged or fake documents. And when I was in court, that was all I kept asking. I want to see my original note and deed. Now, when you said if you want a pointer for people who are fighting in court, it's go back to origination. Don't worry about all the robo-signers, and there's going to be nothing but robo-signers all over those documents. You have to go back to origination. He never had the original documents or deeds, and he never will. And when I was in court, I asked, I have a forensic auditor here, just, Judge, let me see the original document, give me 1 week, and that's it. I'll walk away. I'll go away. He wouldn't give it to me. Then I said 3 days. Well, my attorney did. 3 days. No. 1 day. No. Then the judge says, why don't you hand the documents to me that you have? Opposing counsel Perkins Coie hands them the documents. The judge flips through them, says, looks real to me. Summary judgment, dismissed. I'm like, seriously? Where's my jury? Let me have my evidence. And if you could even prove that, you could have my house, but you can't because you're thieves.
Was that at the local level, the state and the federal level that you experienced that, Ariel?
Well, the state level was a joke. They just filed there to take $500 from me, and that just starts sifting off those who can't afford it. So the strategy is file in the state court, make them pay the $500, then move them to the federal court, then start writing tons and tons and tons of paperwork, send in as many companies as you can to fight that person, so they're having to answer 4 or 5 companies, and you're like, well, who really owns this? Will the real owner of this please stand up? And after years of battle, they start falling off till there's nothing left but LNV and Andrew Beal. Well, Andrew Beal posted his letter in the Wall Street Journal right after the 2008 crash. And he wrote a very clear note that he knew what to do with all that bad paper. Everybody, all these banks started handing them their bad paper. These documents are so bad, and they're recorded in every county in the United States as bad paper. And if you read the book Chain of Title by David Dayen, you can watch the corruption where it begins not only on the state and local levels, but goes all the way up through the attorney generals, all the way up to the White House, all the way up to Eric Holder, all the way up to Barack Obama. And even now, Andrew Beal was deeply involved with Trump. He was going to be a financial advisor for him in his campaign. He has donated a tremendous amount of money to President Trump, and he is involved with his son and flying around in planes, and there is deep connections between Russia and Deutsche Bank, and here's a real estate monger right here now in our country, an American oligarch. He's robbing Americans of their homes. He has so much money. He's a billionaire. Billionaires can do anything they want in this country, and they're really not held to justice. He can hire the top lawyers in every single city in this country who are connected to all the judges, and he can handle all of this, especially when somebody stands up and fights and won't sit down. He just laughs and says, keep it going, when he should have settled and walked away.
Now, I know this is very personal between Andy Beal and you because of all that you've suffered and all that you've had to do in these last 6 years to fight someone literally coming in and taking your house. A guy who's a billionaire who really doesn't need your house, even though I understand you have a very beautiful house, a beautiful spot up on top of the mountain, you know, all that. But the point is, this man doesn't need it. This is a game for him. And now what I want to know is, in your experience, have you seen anybody win against this stacked deck of cards, against this scam of a real estate ripoff to basically foreclose on houses using paperwork that isn't actually legal?
Well, I haven't won yet, and I should have won 6 years ago. And I think if there are small victories right now in when they sold my house, when they went through these series of courts and finally sold my house illegally, I went into the court to sue the sheriffs. And the sheriffs got on the stand and admitted that they had illegally sold my house outside the time recorded by the judgment. And the judge ruled in their behalf. And then we took it to the Oregon Supreme Court, and we just finished arguing before the Supreme Court that they had no right, that the law is the law, and that they shouldn't have stole it. And I'm waiting to hear that ruling right now come back, which has given me another year in my house. But I do think there are smaller victories in California. There are some small victories scattered throughout the United States by a rare judge that will stand up and rule in someone's behalf. But there's also gag orders put on those, and they're very rare. But I do think people are waking up, and I do think that you won't be able to hide this from the people much longer, how corrupt the banks are. And if you want to look online, you can see the banks are making huge payoffs on a regular basis every year for corrupt, fraudulent foreclosure, predatory practices. It's no secret anymore. But I think the hour is coming soon when the homeowners have to have restitution. But it's kind of like the tobacco cover-up. It would reach so many homes across this country. What if tomorrow every person stood up and said, you don't own my house and I don't have to pay you anymore? How does that work for the country?
Oh, you're talking my language now, because this is what I suggest. I suggest that the patriots simply say to MERS, go jump in the lake. We're taking our land. And until you can show exactly what you have pointed out in this broadcast, what is needed for them to prove that they actually own that land and that you owe them some mortgage payment, then look, 80% of the domiciles in America could actually come into the ownership of people. Instead of having a house that you have to keep paying taxes on for the rest of your life, I suggest a land bank. But let's remember that the savings and loans took away 1/3 of the mortgages of America by politicians like the Keating Five, John McCain being the leader of them, leading the savings and loan debacle that took away 1/3 of the assets of Americans concerning their real estate, and it basically destroyed the savings and loans companies, banks and companies, and all that support that was part of that. So what we're seeing is, if the politicians can crash it, why can't we, the people, crash it? Why can't we stand up? And I am a big advocate of that. I'm a big advocate of saying we need to have a revolution, and the revolution needs to be creating basically what would be a land bank. Once you get your land back and you own it, then you can take those assets and put it in a bank and borrow against it. And then the local community banks will be very strong. But when we see things like that happening, and when we see Enron using futures, because it's these mortgage-backed securities, which were falsely audited and given higher ranking than they're supposed to, that then became the problem of 2018, the housing crisis and the crash. And we know that was only 1/3 of them. 2/3 of them still exist upon, well, the bank still owned them. And so this isn't going away. What you're talking about, Ariel, is not going away. It is the tip of the iceberg. When this comes back again, it's going to be, and could be, one of the most fatal things to happen to Americans in our economic history. And so let's see if we can't simply end MERS. There are actually laws that created MERS and created this e-note and e-registry. We need to turn around those laws. We need to work with legislators. There are people who are lawyers who are going into those mortgage-backed securities, and because the banks know that they're so bad, and because there's been so much activity happen since then, that these lawyers go in, and others who aren't lawyers, and they help people who are in these situations. But it's the most difficult thing you can imagine, to unravel like all of that, to actually find out who owns it, to follow it back through all. Usually your house is sold to a new mortgage person who is handling the lending fees that you are paying them every year. Once it's done 3 times, after the 3rd year you own your house, it almost guaranteed through MERS goes into the securities, mortgage-backed securities, which in the old days, they were subprime and they were bad and they were illegal and they were fraudulent. And you know all about that, and that has been something that has driven URL, I know, in trying to figure out what the heck happened to you. But what I want to know now, before we go to hear Denise's story, is Andy Beal, how personal did it get? It seems as if, I'm going to use that qualifying word, it seems as if you have been attacked. You have been targeted, you have been attacked, and you were considered to be a victim because of, I believe you had some medical problems or something, but at one moment it looked as if there was a way for them to wedge into your economic scenario. They victimized you, they attacked you. That's what it seems like. But then you told me stories how it got so personal that it literally became horrible. I would be myself horrifyingly frightened by the type of intimidation that whoever it was that was intimidating you did. And we can't necessarily say exactly who it was, but it's pretty obvious that it looks as if you have been targeted and attacked.
I would like to address that, and I would like to also follow up on one thing you said about the banks, and that is that we do need to wake up across the country and stand up. It will be the only way we can break this stronghold that bankers and these lawyers and judges have on us. And I'm going to say that if you're a lawyer and you decide to fight this battle, you've just lost your fraternal brotherhood, and you have to realize you've stepped out of being accepted by all other lawyers, and you'll be ostracized. And my current attorney has been disbarred in one state with fake or fraudulent accusations against her, and is fighting to get her license back. And that my first attorney folded at one point and knew that it was either his career or telling the truth. And at one point, after a huge amount of money, he chose his career. And then he stepped out and threw me under the bus. We have found that several litigants' attorneys were probably given large amounts of money to step away from them or abandon them or betray them. So there's this line even for the attorneys that says, will you step on this side of the law, or will you be dishonest and take your career first? Secondly, these bankers have so much money that their children's 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 children will never want for a penny. And in The Big Short, at one point, in the end, this one person says to the other, how can you do this? And he laughs with a glass of champagne in his hand and says, you have no idea how rich I am now. You couldn't comprehend how rich I am from what we've done with the insurance-backed complaints that we will have in saying that these false primes, low prime homes are worth nothing. We've sold them like 6 times. I've been through, my house was sold by Greenpoint, then Homeside, then by Aurora, then by Washington Mutual, then to Residential Funding, then to Andy Beal, which was LNV, which was MGC Mortgage, which was Litton Loan. It's a joke. You don't know who you're supposed to be suing. And in the beginning, it was bad documents. It should have never started this chain. So how was I intimidated? Let me address that too. There was people breaking into my home, and they were doing things to let me know that they had broken in. They would take one shoe that was next to a shoe, and they would take a bag, my IRS documents that were in perfect order, and they would shake them up and leave them in a black plastic bag in the middle of my front room. They started hacking into my computer, and I had to hire professionals, and they would tell me, these are really bad people in your computer. We know our phones were being listened into, and especially when there was an important filing coming up, they would seem to have some information or know what my information or what I was going to do. They started breaking in, and they stole another box of documents, and I put cameras up. I started realizing that somebody knew my patterns because my cameras were being jammed while I went to worship on Sunday between the same time on a regular basis. I located someone in my city that personally was hired by Andrew Beal to do things that we should say were not quite legal. And he was a friend of his in playing poker. He was involved in the World Poker Club that Andy Beal is in. We know that Andy Beals gambled away millions and millions and millions of dollars and he would think of it as a joke. And I would sit there and think, how many poor homeowners did you throw out to have that fun evening? He would throw widows out of their house, and I understood that he would personally go through the documents and find those who were old or sick or divorced or who were having a hard time. I had a car accident, and I had perfect record up to that moment, and I asked them to remodify for me. I sent in 7 packages of hardship. They lost every single one, they said. Finally, I spoke to my senator, Ron Wyden, and I asked him to intervene. And he intervened and said, give her a remodification. They gave me an extortion. I mean, my attorney and my CPA said, that is garbage. Tell them to eat sand. They want more money than when you even started. And so then the lawsuit began. But I'm aware that another litigant had to hire a detective with a gun to sit on his property to keep Andy Beals' people from breaking into his property. He literally hired a guy with a gun to sit on his property.
Ariel, it is shocking what you've gone through. It is sad. It is heartbreaking. People don't understand this is $210 quadrillion held up in one computer in a company, MERS, that actually has no employees. This is the greatest real estate fraud ever in history. And that you have been targeted in this way by whomever it was that targeted you, it's so sad. Is there any way, do you have a website or anything that people can contact you at?
I have an email, which is ihom@ihom.org. It's IHOM like Mary, M like Mary, at IHOMM.org. And it's a ministry. I have a nonprofit ministry. I'm a prison chaplain for 24 years. I am a Medi-Spa owner, my own spa, and I do a lot of medical practices. I'm a beekeeper. I'm deeply involved in my community. But if you pull my name up on the website, you're going to find case after case after case after case after court case listed. And that's really all that I'm listed for online at this point. I'm so buried in court cases that you best use my email.
Well, I understand that if people do contact you, that you are really a coordinator in this whole effort, as well as a key person to help people, sometimes direct people. So, and also, in my suggestion, maybe both for Denise and for you, if people can help in any way, contact you and see what you can do. Maybe you can give advice. Maybe you can find a lawyer. Maybe you can do whatever you can do. But the point is, this is a battle. This is a war. This is in your own home. This is not a conspiracy outside of your home. This is a direct attack on your home. Flee away from your home, and you live in a travel trailer now, and Andy Beal, you have said, possibly was a person who was then focused on you, not unlike with Ariel. And also, I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit about how it was that they defrauded you and got your house through foreclosure that was this kind of mess that we're talking about today?
I'm actually a victim of Andy Beals also, and there's many others. I've spoken personally to 40 other victims, and I've worked with about 12. And he does the same thing in all of our cases. He forges what he considers an original note. And I had, both mine and several other people, including Ariel's, so-called original note was a forgery. And it's provable with all the other documents. We can prove with the dates and, when things happened that those notes were actual forgeries. They were digitally created and then presented, printed out in color to make it look like they were legitimate notes, and they weren't. And we never gotten our day in court. The thing that Ariel was always asking about was, can I get the forensic auditor to audit, to examine this and determine its authenticity. And we never got a day in court to do that because the judges would make that determination and then issue a summary judgment. And there's a Supreme Court decision that had said that, which was in 2011, I think, where the Supreme Court said that on summary judgment, the role of a judge is not to make a fact, a determination of fact, which is what they did. Like Ariel had said that the judge held up the paper and said, "Oh, it looks real to me." That's a determination of fact. So the judges themselves are in on what's happening. And, my life has been really destroyed because of this, because, I have disabilities. For 2 years, I lived in a Jeep. I haven't been able to everything to come together because I have attention deficit disorder, and people with that function very well when they have stability. I've had no stability now for going on 3 years, and it's very difficult for me to function because of that. And I think that's planned. And also, like Ariel had mentioned, the people breaking into her house. I had people follow me, and not just me, other victims of Andy Beal have had really strange experiences. I know 2 people that had somebody run them off the road. We can never prove it's him. I had people show up and out of nowhere, and it was like they were following me. So your life gets a little scary because, and again, the phone conversations with them being bugged. We've had things that have happened where the only way they could have known, they make some action because they had to have heard us on the phone talking. There's about a dozen of the Beal victims who talk with each other, and they could have all of our phones bugged as far as we know. And I had a computer stolen, and at that time we were talking to a reporter in Texas by the name of Brett Shipp. All of our things, my computer was stolen. I was the one who kept everything organized on that particular computer. So we've had horrible things happen to us, and this has opened my eyes up to the issue of homelessness. Every city in this country has major issues with homelessness right now, and a lot of it is because our homes have been stolen from us.
And that's what's so important. The person you're mentioning is the banker who is the economic terrorist in your area, but he also has banks and has affiliations throughout the rest of the states. And there's many of these bankers. And this type of greed can't be stopped. And it's an illness. And that someone would go to that trouble to take from you what would mean so little to them in the end, but meant everything to you, is absolutely disgraceful. It's a terrible, sad thing to hear. And all the homeless people, yes, in America, we don't even know how many people lost their home through these fraudulent foreclosures based upon this company that shouldn't even exist to begin with. And then the insider trading is Andy Beal and all those other bankers, they belong to MERS. They tell MERS what's in MERS. And so when you're talking about creating fraudulent documents, MERS is nothing more than a computer program to create fraudulent documents. That's what it does. And you had said earlier, Denise, that what you wanted to communicate to people was go get your original documents. And then if your house gets reassigned to a new mortgage lender, contest it. And check to see if they have the documentation, because they don't. The whole point of MERS is that they don't have the documentation. So what you were saying is absolutely crucial. What else would you like to tell other people who may be going through this, or who, like you, have literally been made homeless by this type of predatory mortgage economic terrorism?
Well, you have to pay attention to all of the dates on all of the documents. So when I say documents, I mean all of the assignments, the substitution of trustee documents, and any other documents that were filed in your county. And then also start looking at whatever they filed in court, claiming that it's a genuine document, to see where the discrepancies are. You'll find, we've had people in our group who've had the same document, say an assignment, what they do is they attach these documents called allonges when they present it to the court, and those documents are typically forgeries. They do it to make it look like they've conveyed the note from one party to another. And with both Ariel and I, they had purported to convey from numerous other parties. It ended up with Residential Funding Company, LLC. And then there's a purported conveyance from Residential Funding Company, LLC, to L&B Corporation that's owned by Andy Beal. Well, the conveyance could not have happened because in my case, the document that they had filed, that substitution of trustee. Remember, I mentioned that in 2006, somebody attempted to do what they call a non-judicial foreclosure, and I hired an attorney to challenge the fact that I did not have any missing payments. Well, that party was Homecomings Financial Network, which is another GMAC entity, and it's a subsidiary is the right word, and that they were actually in 2006 the party that was attempting to foreclose. I didn't know that then, but I found it out by looking at all of the documents. Well, the next document that they had filed said that in April of 2006, and it was in December. It was all the way through from April through January of 2007 that this Homecomings was trying to do a non-judicial foreclosure based on the documents. And the next document that was filed was or recorded, I should say, in the county, actually was a document that was a assignment that purported to convey the note in the deed of trust from Homecomings to Residential Funding on April 4th. Well, that couldn't have been because they were attempting to foreclose on me after April 4th. So how could Homecomings convey it to Residential Funding when at the same time they're attempting to foreclose on me for months and months after that? And that's one of the things that you have to look for is those discrepancies in the date.
Did you ever see the light at the end of the tunnel? In all of your fighting, in all that you're telling me here, did you ever see the opportunity that it looked like you were going to win and keep your house? Or were the cards so stacked against you that you just didn't have a chance? Ariel, in your experience, as we've just heard from what Denise was saying, these trials, these attempts to go into court to fight for this, has anybody won that you know of that can actually go after the principal problem here, not just their specific mortgage, but after the real problem? I mean, is there going to be any legislation? Is there going to be any critical judgments from the court, particularly from the Supreme Court of Oregon, as you have gone before them, that might be able to help people across the board? Or is this a one-on-one kind of challenge that you have with the courts, which basically is dependent upon how much money you have, how much stamina you have?
Well, I just spoke with several judges, and they admitted that unless you're white, rich, and privileged, the law does not work for you. And these are 3 judges that just said this to me recently. And to be honest, they're like Unova. There's been a few cases here or there, really rare cases. And I know another litigant, Ms. Swift, who's fighting with me, and we've gotten into it. We've put some serious paperwork down that they have to answer. Now, most of their responses are just insulting us as people. They never address the evidence. And I even had one attorney that represented the attorneys that I sued here, and she used to be the president of the bar. And she finally told me, exactly, I think I recorded it. You lose because you don't have any ability to win. You actually can't win, is what she told me. Now, when I pulled up the 49 Attorney General's case with Denise helping me recently, and we discovered that, a judge had ruled that the attorneys could then put a fine on me after me suing them for fraud and false declarations and perjuries placed in the court that once again we could prove were false. I mean, I just don't understand why we lose. This is ridiculous. It's heretic.
It's called fake justice, Ariel.
It's so fake.
And
it's so corrupt.
It underscores my desire to simply create a revolution to get rid of MERS. Period. It doesn't need to exist. The drive towards centralization into one computer, one software program that controls everything, whether it be the stock market, whether it be the commodities exchange, whether it be MERS, that's just wrong. And we need to stop that. And yes, unfortunately, the fake justice system doesn't recognize you because you're not a landed gentry. You're not an esquire. You're not like a monarch that sits on the Supreme Court justice as a Supreme Court justice and makes rules as if they are, in fact, directly inspired by divine right. So what we see here is so sad. Both the story that you've told, Denise, what has happened to you, and the fact that you have a good avenue now to go, but you don't have the lawyers to do it. And without that standing, without those lawyers, it's very hard to move forward. And Ariel, what you've told us, your amazing fight, this battle you've been going on, that's been going on with you for 6 years just to keep your property, we salute that. And everyone, I'm sure, that are our listeners, send their heartfelt feelings out to you and their blessings to both of you. And I want to thank you for being with us today and to bring this to light, because oftentimes consciousness can be the critical mass that causes things to happen. And let's hope that what we're doing here today can reach the ears of many people who can not only help those who are having their houses stolen from them through false foreclosures, but can also help us in an attempt to create a moratorium on MERS. So, Ariel, Denise, thank you for being here today.